It's great to see so many familiar faces here for the AP report to the membership that we are always pleased to provide every year. I'm going to give you a brief rundown of who's going to talk and remind you that we'll have questions at the end of the presentation, and the questions can be for any of us here, not just the folks who present. It's a political year, you may have noticed, and so we bring Liz Sidoti, AP's political editor, who's in charge of all the coverage, to talk with you about what she sees as the state of the race with just a few scant weeks left till Election Day, and the things that are really different about this cycle. Kristin Gazlay, who is a managing editor in charge of state news for us, is going to talk about some things that we've been doing in state capitals to enrich the state reports that are, as we all call them, the crown jewels of the AP report. Santiago Lyon is our chief of photography, director of photography, and he's going to show you some cool things that our new cameras have done and some new techniques that our photographers are using that help make pictures stickier for your readers on your websites and in your newspapers. And Michael Oreskes is a senior managing editor who's in charge of lots of things, including the U.S. report and the daily report, and he's here as ballast, backup, and humor.
Not in that order.
But I'm most pleased today to introduce to you AP's new president and CEO, Gary Pruitt. Gary comes to us after a long and successful career running McClatchy, one of America's great newspaper companies, and I had the privilege of getting to know him during his 9 years of service on the Associated Press Board of Directors. He's just taken over the helm at the AP at a dynamic time. I think he would agree with that word, and he's here to talk with you a little bit about his views of AP and APME. Ladies and gentlemen, Gary Pruitt.
Thank you, Kathleen. Really one of the great pleasures of being at AP is getting the chance to work with Kathleen Carroll, one of this generation's great editors. I've been at the AP as president now for about 2 months, and I can already tell you it's a pretty cool job. It's exhilarating, it's stimulating, it's closer to the news, but like any media job these days, it's challenging, and you know that. It's like the media critic Frederick Jameson termed the postmodern sublime, which is the simultaneous apprehension of dread and ecstasy. You know it, don't you? You can get ecstasy in a pill form these days, but regardless of that, I hope Nashville brings more ecstasy than dread as we deal with our version of postmodernism. But there's much to value in the APME-AP relationship. APME is a working group. It's an organization that gets things done for the betterment of newspapers and broadcasters. It really does have an outstanding board, an outstanding president, Bob Heiss, and there's much that AP and APME can do together. We can be journalistic partners in our core mission, you know, writing stories together, working on stories together to extend our journalistic capabilities and reach, speaking truth to and about power. We can help each other in our core area. Second, we can be First Amendment partners. I started my career as a First Amendment lawyer from Berkeley, so you might expect I'm passionate about free press and free speech rights. I spent the first decade of my career clearing pre-publication thousands of stories, defending libel suits, quashing subpoenas, opening courtrooms, opening public records. Lots of fights. AP is great because there are more places to fight in that way, and we can be brothers and sisters in arms in the battle to uphold the Constitution. I mean, let's face it, the First Amendment isn't in the Constitution because the Founding Fathers liked journalists or because they were idealists. It's there because that's how a democratic society works. Next, we need APME for your feedback. It's valuable for standards, for quality, for relevance, what you need from AP. That goes very back to the reason APME was founded 79 years ago in French Lick, Indiana, from those humble beginnings to the Siegenthaler Center today. We can also partner in training, and this is a very tough issue these days because the budget cutbacks are so substantial. But APME has the best training going. News Train has the biggest bang for the buck, and it's entering its 10th anniversary this year. So we at AP thought it was important this year, in honor of that 10th anniversary, to make a contribution of $25,000 to continue News Train's great work and the best journalistic training in the country. APME earned that contribution with News Train and its great training capability. It's not an easy year for AP to make a $25,000 contribution, but it reflects our confidence and our judgment of what a valuable program News Train training is. We can even be business partners today in a way we couldn't before. We can share advertising revenue. AP has a mobile news app. I don't know if you guys have if everyone's downloaded it yet, but if not, you should do it today. It's free. It's the best breaking news app in the world. And you know what? You can be on it too. You can be our local partner. AP can supply the national news, the international news. You can supply the local news. And we'll share ad revenues. You can drive people to your website. You don't have to put up complete stories if you don't want to. There's a great deal of flexibility there. We can sell ad revenue. You can sell the ad revenue availability and keep all the revenue. So I think it's a great opportunity for you to extend your brand to a national platform. And we also do this with what we call our digital news experiences. But these are digital verticals in various topics. We did it with the Olympics and college basketball. Over 350 newspapers in the United States took our Olympic package, ran it on their website. It's on your sites. It's not on any AP site. And then we sell ad revenue there, you sell advertising there, and we can share that ad revenue. We're doing it with college football. We're doing it with pro football. You get people to your sites and keep them. And it's a relationship that we can all benefit from. And I think it's that kind of changing business relationship that we're going to have at AP and at the newspapers. You know, Darwin said, it's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the ones most adaptable to change. I read that quote and I thought, great, finally some good news. We don't have to be the strongest or the smartest. We can do that. We just have to be adaptable to change. And we have been, and you have been. Today, 35% of AP's revenue is international. If you look at our top 10 customers, it includes digital companies, a couple newspaper companies, international broadcast networks, a very diverse lineup of customers. Only 22% of AP's revenue comes from US newspapers. US broadcasters represent even less. But that doesn't mean you're less important to AP. That doesn't lessen our commitment to you. Rather, it allows us to serve you completely and affordably by having that diverse business base and growing platform of customers. And it's only in that way that AP can provide you the most up-to-date, the most accurate, the most objective, and the most complete, and just plain best news report in the world every day. So while the business may change, and it will change, and it's changing right now, our mission doesn't. Ours doesn't, yours doesn't. And that feels pretty good in these changing times. And it feels right, and I tell you, I look forward to working together, APME. And with that, I will turn it over to Liz so we can begin to tell you how AP is fulfilling its mission. Thank you.
Pardon me, I'm getting set. Good morning, thanks for having me. Some of you know me, and I'm not one to say I told you so. However, a year ago, I addressed this group in Denver, and at the time I said, I won't bury the lead. We'll have a competitive presidential election next year to cover, and predictions of a blowout by either side are grossly overstated and premature. And well, 12 months later, here we are. We have a competitive presidential race. Predictions of a blowout by either side are premature. And we are 47 days out, and here's where we're at. Obama, he's flying high right now. He's enjoying what we would call a post-convention bounce of support in key states and nationally. He's also seeing his standing on the economy grow stronger, which nobody thought would happen given this 8.1% unemployment rate. And basically, he's being kept afloat by the fact that people like him, his personal likability. As one top Democrat in his campaign puts it to me the other day, we're defying gravity, she said. Romney, meanwhile, is reeling, so much so that some Republicans are going so far as to call it quits, say there's no way he can win right now. He's faced inherent challenges from the start, as every challenger to an incumbent president has, but he's also not a particularly natural candidate, and he's struggled to connect with voters. And at the same time, he's made his quest even tougher lately with a series of unforced errors, including a series of them this week. But there's still time. Just this morning, a Romney insider gave me his take. As dour as it was, he said, look, it's tough, but it's not inconceivable that we'll pull this out. See, at this point, everything says Obama shouldn't be performing as well as he is, given the sluggish economy and the fact that most people don't approve of where the country's headed. But people like him more than Romney, and Romney's had a hard time connecting with people. Consider this. Over the last 8 weeks, Romney had a rocky overseas trip, a lackluster convention in which it could be argued that Clint Eastwood stole the show by having an impromptu conversation with an empty chair. Romney bobbled on an opportunity to gain ground on foreign policy, and he's lost his advantage with Obama on the economy. It was Romney's one strength. Now, the equivalent of an anvil was dropped on Romney's head this week. It was in the form of a secretly taped video at a private fundraiser that showed the candidate repeatedly putting his foot in his mouth on a host of issues. He's in damage control mode right now. Republicans started openly griping about the state of his campaign and his ineffectiveness as a candidate and the fact that he wasn't spending a lot of time in battleground states. Democrats in Chicago and elsewhere were smiling. Nobody thought that Obama would be in this position with 7 weeks to go. Obama did at his convention what he set out to do: send voters a message, stick with me, we're not done yet, the other guy's much more risky. However, Obama, his advisors, Democrats across the board are really, really cautious. You know this, the environment out there, particularly with the economy, is not good. They know that the environment is really, really tough for Obama, and that 2 more jobs reports are still to come. 1, 4 days just before the election. And as good as Obama is on the campaign trail, and he is, if voters sense that things aren't getting better, they very well could still fire him. So there are a few big things that are happening this year that are new or more pronounced that you all should pay attention to understand why this still is a very, very tight race. We're seeing this unfathomable amount of money pour into the states, and the race is expected to cost about $2 billion or more between both the official campaign expenses and then these new things called super PACs. Remember, this is the first election since the federal courts unraveled campaign finance laws that used to restrict how money could be spent in political races, and now what you have is millionaires and billionaires funneling money to outside groups and hiding their identities as donors. So the big question is, who really is funneling, or who really is paying for campaigns in America? It's a very murky answer. So the other issue is it's all been incredibly negative and personal. Both candidates essentially on a daily basis call each other liars. And more organizations than ever before, mine at the AP and all of yours, are fact-checking these guys and finding out that they're spewing falsehoods on a host of matters, mischaracterizing comments that each makes. And our fact-checking doesn't seem to be mattering one lick. The candidates, every day, still are twisting the facts and they're outright lying. Yet, we all are providing that accountability journalism that's so critical in campaign coverage. There's also been a radical change this year. Voting is beginning much earlier than ever before. The days of waiting until the election day to cast a ballot are over. And by Friday, just to add some perspective, half of all states will be allowed to start voting early by Friday, either by mail or in person. So both sides are now at this point of aggressively courting these voters. And every single day, it's either they've won a voter or they've lost a voter. The times have changed. Impressions among voters are being crystallized even earlier. And once a person votes, that's it. And if you're wondering whether or not we'll be able to declare a winner on election night, I have to tell you, I sure hope so. But I can honestly say I don't know. And here's the deal. Not only is this race incredibly close, but there are a bunch of new voter ID laws in states, and both campaigns have huge numbers of lawyers on standby ready to challenge the count in courts. The economy continues to be by far the most dominant issue. But on most days you wouldn't know it because both sides are jockeying for support at the margins and trying to get any advantage they can on a range of issues. It's part of the reason why we at the AP have started what we call the Why It Matters series to really explain to voters every day this month why a certain issue matters to them and why it's important, why this election is so important. So in the home stretch, both sides are working to fire up their core backers, but they're mostly looking to pick off support at the margins, mindful that any factor can shake up this race. And Romney's trying to narrow Obama's advantage with Hispanics and women in hopes that it puts him over the top in Colorado, Nevada, and Virginia. Obama's trying to cut into the traditional GOP edge with seniors and veterans in places like Ohio and Florida and Iowa. And independent voters matter a lot. So here we are. The race is focused on just 8 states. I'll remind you, it takes 270 electoral college votes to win. Those 8 are Ohio, Florida, Virginia, New Hampshire, Iowa, Nevada, Colorado, and now Wisconsin. I'm sorry, Tennessee. To win, Romney has a hard challenge. He basically has to thread the needle. And we lay this out in a series we call The Road to 270. It explains and documents how well the candidates are doing in each state and which ones they need to win to clinch the White House. So to give you a little perspective, if the election were held today, Obama would start with 237 electoral votes in his column because he's in such strong standing in Democratic states. States are solidly Democratic like New York and California and Illinois. And he's in pretty solid states and pretty solid shape in states that are leaning his way. So he starts with 237. Romney would start with 206 votes if he won every state that was solidly in his camp, Tennessee being one of them, or leaning his way. So that means there are only 95 electoral votes up for grabs. Excuse me. And given how far Romney has to come to reach 270, Obama has several scenarios to reaching that number. So many, in fact, that he could do it without winning Ohio or Florida, provided he wins most of the other toss-up states. But Romney has fewer paths to reaching the magic number, and Florida and Ohio for him loom very large. Consider this. If he loses one of those states, it's much more difficult, and if he loses both, it's nearly impossible to see how he wins. So Romney's got to have a near-perfect night. Now, I'm not saying this can't happen. There's still 7 weeks to go. A lifetime in politics is the old cliche. And we still have what I think are the last opportunities for a real turning point in this race, barring something unforeseen, and those are the debates. I think if you talk to Republicans and Democrats and those inside the Obama camp, those inside Romney camp, everyone's looking at the debates as especially critical this year, given how tight this race has been. There's also no telling what unforeseen circumstance may arise. Iran or Syria, I mean, in a matter of 12 hours, we saw foreign policy be pushed to the forefront of the campaign last week. Just as quickly as it was at the forefront of the campaign, though, it left, and it's back to the economy. You know, we could have another economic collapse, a terrorist attack, 2 more bad jobs reports. You know, certainly a lot can happen before November 6th that can shift the trajectory of this race. By all indications, right now, it's going to be a close race. And maybe on November 7th, we'll have a new president. Thank you.
So
AP reporter Mike Baker got very, very curious when he learned a Democratic candidate for governor in Washington State had given campaign contribution refunds to his friends and family and no one else, and that a Republican state lawmaker had used his surplus funds to donate money to his wife's charity. What, Baker wonders, happens with all of the money that candidates don't spend? So Baker, who works in the State House in Olympia, got to work answering his own question. Using a state database and his computer-assisted reporting skills, and you can see the database he created here, Baker was able to come to a startling conclusion. Washington state legislators were spending thousands of dollars in extra campaign cash on things like alcohol, iPads, clothes, baseball tickets, and auto repairs. And Baker didn't keep his number crunching to himself. He helped reporters at AP member newspapers mine the database so they could produce deep dives on the state representatives in their areas. Such accountability work is laudable, but it's also not uncommon for AP reporters and state bureaus. In fact, it's something we emphasize. The AP is a leading and aggressive user of open record laws in its reporting, as well as a tireless advocate of the importance of transparency and accountability in government. AP journalists file an average of 1,500 FOIAs a year, along with dozens of FOI appeals. Almost every week, bureaus across the country ask our legal team for help fighting for access in various court cases, most often to unsealed court records or open courtroom access during closed testimony. And we do it with you, the editors in this room, very often, and your organizations. Just this year, we've joined with member newspapers to battle to keep court proceedings open and gain access to material in such high-profile cases as the Trayvon Martin killing, the Sandusky trial, and the Aurora shootings. But we also routinely go to court on lower-profile matters if we think the principle or what we are seeking is important, say trying to get access to a governor's calendar or emails or travel records. We also take on access members that aren't strictly FOIA or courtroom issues. For instance, earlier this year, the AP led a coalition of 16 media parties in suing the state of Iowa to be able to view the full execution procedure for condemned prisoners. We were only being allowed to come in partway through, and the part we couldn't see is the part where things often go wrong. We argued the case in the Ninth Circuit, and we won a resounding victory. The Idaho execution protocol was changed immediately to allow full viewing. And on top of that, the state was ordered to reimburse the media coalition for all of its legal costs. We take our accountability mandate extremely seriously. Some representative stories from this year. For 2 years, the two Kansas cities on opposite sides of the Missouri-Kansas border have waged a bitter fight for new business, typical of the national desperation of states and cities for new jobs and tax revenue. David Lieb and John Hanna, correspondents in each state, wanted to know more about this border war, particularly how much money had been spent luring businesses at a time when the states were cutting funds for education and other social services. By using FOIA requests and more than a little persistence, they were able to come up with the forehead-smacking answer. The two states had committed a combined $750 million in incentives and bonds to attract business from each other, while cutting the budgets for other needs. Holbrook Moore in Mississippi, we call him Bert. By the way, he is not being arrested. He is giving a pool report after witnessing an execution, so not that sort of legal fight there. He broke a series of stories related to how outgoing Mississippi Governor Haley Barbour had granted pardons to almost 200 people, including convicted killers. Because 5 of the 198 people pardoned were prison trustees working in the governor's mansion, Moore said he thought it just seemed the natural thing to do to pull their files and get insight into who these guys were who were going to be let out on the street. Well, he found there really weren't files. Of the 5 mansion trustees were pretty much released on the word of the governor and his wife. And who were they? Well, Moore's digging found that the 5 included an armed robber who had killed his victim execution style, and others who had killed wives or girlfriends. Concor's Holly Raymer and New York City's David Caruso teamed up to hold the medical system accountable. tracing the work history of a medical technician fired from his job in New Hampshire after being accused of infecting at least 30 patients with hepatitis C. They learned that a broken system had allowed a man who had been repeatedly fired to keep getting jobs. He got jobs in 18 hospitals in 8 states, despite allegations that he used dirty needles on patients and came to work with drugs in his system. The problem just kept getting passed along. And lastly, Carla Johnson in Chicago produced a series of AP news breaks over this past year on her beat in Illinois, the very timely beat of the overlap between healthcare and state politics. 2 days before the historic Supreme Court ruling, for instance, Johnson broke the news that Barack Obama's home state had dawdled so much that it would miss the deadline for setting up its own health care exchange if the Affordable Care Act, or what some call Obamacare, were approved by the court, which of course it promptly was. We have news on the Affordable Care Act front. After some really great discussions with AP members, AP reporters and state bureaus are making coverage of its implementation a key focus in their reporting, cutting through the spin and honing in on the issues most pertinent to each individual state. We're really going to be ramping that up, so look to hear more on that soon. And we'll also be offering a free webinar for members next month. It's October 23rd, open to anyone who wants to participate, in which our chief healthcare writer in Washington and 2 nonpartisan experts will offer their expertise and tips on understanding and covering the Act. And they will take lots and lots of questions. We'll be getting at the word very soon on how you can sign up for that. And now here is Santiago Lyon.
Thank you, Kristin. So once every 4 years we get lucky and we have a bumper year with both the presidential election and a Summer Olympic Games, just to keep things interesting. I'd like to spend a few minutes showing you some photography from the London Olympics and some of the backstories behind the images. Photography plays a large role in today's media world, with eyeballs gravitating naturally towards compelling imagery, and licensing of photos through AP Images is an important source of revenue that helps keep the cooperative healthy. For those reasons, we invest heavily in our photo coverage and the state-of-the-art equipment needed to produce it. For some, the defining image of London is this spectacular photo of U.S. gold medal winning gymnast Gabby Douglas, high over the beam during her routine. For photographer Greg Bull, the image was made possible through preparation. He'd been photographing her since the Olympic trials and knew her routine well. But he also had state-of-the-art Canon D1X camera capable of shooting a whopping 12 frames per second, as did all of 65 of our Olympic photographers. These 2 elements, preparation and equipment, combined with patience and talent, allowed Greg to make an image seen and used around the world. Again and again, this combination of talent and equipment proved very successful at London. Photographer Mark Sirota's image of a BMX bike rider doing a face plant was made possible in part because of his high-speed camera. And DJ Phillips made this incredible image of a swimmer plunging into the water with an underwater camera. More on that a little bit later. The details and focus are extraordinary thanks to his gear. Just look at those air bubbles frozen in time. Because of the amazing resolution of our images, we were also able to make close-up photos like these, and crops like this out of a frame. Even this image of Andy Murray hugging his girlfriend shot from quite far away, we were able to zoom in without much loss in resolution. One really cool feature we liked and used a lot was the ability to make multiple exposures on the same frame, thus freezing the sequential moment of the athletes. This was previously impossible with digital photography, and it allowed for images in London like this, from fencing, from weightlifting, or from the equestrian events. But we had to be judicious with this approach. This image, for example, came in from the show jumping, but it didn't pass muster. Why not? Well, first of all, it seemed a little bit misleading because the distance between the horses was too great. How many horses were there? And then, when our editors zoomed in to the photo, we noticed a strange effect. Transparent saddles. Clearly not an accurate reflection of reality, and thus unacceptable. And then there was the fastest man in the world. Usain Bolt? No. AP photographer David Philip, who positioned multiple remote cameras on the finish line and configured them to freeze Bolt's victory and get the image out to the world way, way ahead of any other agency, thus winning the gold medal. And now I'm going to show you the backstory in a short video of how we got some of these other incredible images.
Hi, I'm Dennis Packman with the Associated Press. By nature, the Olympics is an extremely competitive event, not only for the athletes, but for the news agencies striving to bring you the most creative and historical images.
From one Olympics to the next, our goal is to constantly innovate, whether it's faster networks to deliver our images in a more timely manner, or this time around to bring you a completely different perspective on the athletes.
For these Olympics, photographers David Philip and Maury Gash, along with photo operations manager Tim Donnelly, built robotic units and installed them in 12 Olympic venues. We even built 2 underwater robotic cameras that were positioned in the swimming and diving pools. We also placed 60 remote cameras in various locations to capture the action from unusual angles. Worldwide use, whether online, in print, or broadcast from these specialized cameras in exclusive locations, proved to be highly successful. From the breathtaking images at the opening ceremony to the spectacular photos from underwater, our images stood out. The China Post used Maury Gash's Olympic rings as a wraparound front page. Our first day of swimming competition saw David Phillips' underwater photo of Michael Phelps grace a multitude of front pages around the world. Every venue with a robotic camera produced a variety of these dramatic and storytelling images. The London Times went so far as publishing a poster from one of our overhead remote boxing photos, and the London Guardian carried a double-page spread featuring one of David Phillips' underwater photos. In the future, we will continue to challenge and develop these technologies that frequently put us ahead of our competition.
Great. Thank you very much.
Well, that's the report on the highlights from this year, and now we have some time to take a few questions from you about the presentation or about anything else that's on your mind. And some of our friends here have mics, so if you want to talk into the mic. Hey, Alan.
Hey, I have a quick question about setting up those robotic cameras. How did you get the access, and how long did it take to negotiate?
At the Olympics is an event that we plan for well in advance. In fact, we're already planning for the Winter Olympics in Sochi as we speak. And so we work very closely with the organizers. The International Olympic Committee has a photo liaison person who we work with, and we go and visit the venues well ahead of competition or even before they're finished building them, and we look for angles that we think will be interesting, and then we work with the organizers to make it possible. And so in London, we identified places where we'd like to put cameras, and we worked with the various components of the organizing committee to gain the access, which in London was quite complicated. There were lots of security concerns, lots of safety concerns, and so essentially we were told, yeah, you can put those cameras up there, but you have to put them up almost a full month before the Olympics, and you can't take them down until the Olympics are over. So that meant that we had to design the rigs in a way that they were totally controllable from a remote location. It meant we could power them on, power them off, control the cameras entirely, move them around. It was really done in large part through the hard work of the people that were mentioned in the video.
Just wonder if there are any thoughts about additional strategies, tactics, or whatever to do something to further counteract the fact that campaigns are ignoring the fact that fact checks those kinds of things, basically calling them out, but not having an effect? Are there additional things you can do to have an effect?
Well, I think I have a mic here. Is that working? Yeah. It's one of the interesting lines we're trying to walk carefully here, because we obviously don't want to be combatants in the election. We want to be the providers of the information on which voters can make decisions, and clearly that has to go beyond simply what candidates say. But I do think part of what happens in a campaign is that the candidates know that repetition is their secret, and they'll repeat the same thing over and over and over. And the journalistic tendency is you don't repeat anything. You say it once, it's news, and it goes away. And so I think one of the things that Liz and her team have been learning is that we have to find techniques so that we give you, in a sense, repetition, where we give you repeated access to the larger truths of an election. So one of the things, obviously, is to make fact-check type material available in a continuing way through features that are available to you. Often these are online features particularly. And I think the other part of election coverage that's really important for all of us to know, and we all know this, but it's worth repeating, and I learned this long ago as a political reporter, which is that on most days, the most important political stories aren't the ones labeled political stories. So, for example, today, and I'll go to my AP app, in case this is not product placement. This is simply to point something out. If you go on your AP app this morning, you'll find a story very prominently displayed by Hope Yen from the Washington Bureau, which says, "Has U.S. economy bottomed out? ? Census suggests yes." There's not a political thought in that story, and yet this morning it's the most important political story, because it's a story crammed with facts about the actual state of the U.S. economy. And as Liz, I think, made very clear, for all of the craziness of this election and for all of the back and forth, the economy and how people feel about the economy remains the fundamental voting issue. And what this story suggests is that there are shifts starting to take place, slowly taking place right at this crucial moment as people are voting. How will that change how they feel? Well, this story doesn't even try to answer that, but what it does do is give you a lot of really important facts about the true state of the economy, looking at a lot of measures that you don't even always think of to look at, like, for example, how many young people are moving out from under that faded Obama poster?
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of things. There are two things we're doing that I would put them in two different buckets, and one is constant accountability journalism in our spot copy, in addition to separate fact checks, separate containers in how we're providing that content to you, as Mike was suggesting. The other big thing we're doing is going back to the basics and really emphasizing facts and doing things like Mike was talking about with the Hope Yen story, but also going further than that and saying, why does this issue matter? Here's what's going on with taxes. Here's what could happen under an Obama administration. Here's what could happen under a Romney administration, and providing readers with the truth, the real facts, on which they can educate themselves and then make their own judgments when they hear the lies.
John Adams once said, "Facts are stubborn things, but the best we can do is keep giving them. It's up to the voters to decide what to do with them."
Kathleen, since AP is the gold standard for calling elections, and the race is so tight this year, are you going to be approaching election night any differently in order to make sure that you maintain that gold standard?
Well, every election year we are approaching it with a high degree of preparation and maylocks. There are a lot of things going on this year that make things challenging. One Liz touched on, and that's the early voting and what's going to be happening in the individual states, the legal fights. The other, and Jim Simon and I were talking about this the other day, is when votes are counted. There are some states, Ohio, where the Secretary of State will just declare at some point in the night that they're no longer going to count any more votes, no matter how many are still out, and we're going to have to wait till tomorrow. If you have a really close race somewhere, and we spend a lot of time on the forensics of where the votes are out, what do our statistical patterns show, You know, we do a lot of research before we make a call on a race. The complications of when people are voting, and more importantly, when those votes are being counted and trying to guess how many, you know, statistically guess how many votes are still outstanding, that's going to be the real dynamic this year. In addition, the voting patterns change the value of exit polling, which is a fiendishly expensive, very complicated process that Trevor Thompson, who used to work with us and is now working with a joint venture on polling that we are involved with, you know, just trying to figure out the value of how many people who actually vote on election day and are willing to talk to somebody about who they voted for versus people who voted by mail or people who voted early or voted in some other way. All of that really makes for a complicated stew. It does make you long for federal election control. I know that's heresy, but no, I think the mail-ox is really what helps us most of all, Karen.
There's one thing I do want to add. We're working with our reporters, you know, while our robust analytical effort in calling races is under one, you know, moving in one direction, we also have a significant team of source reporters who are working very closely and reporting what's going on in both campaigns. Both campaigns track this kind of stuff down to a T on election night. They have their own analysts. They're looking at numbers too as well. And so, you know, to the extent that we can't independently call it because of not getting votes in, we can make sure that we're on top of knowing what the campaigns are thinking and knowing if one person concedes the race to the other.
Right. And I did forget to underscore one thing. The thing we have going for us are the reporters and the folks who are calling the races in the states who really know their states. So, you know, we've got smart statisticians in Washington, but the gold standard killer for us is the folks on the ground in the states. So. Hey, Larry. Mm-hmm. Sure. Congratulations on your impending retirement. Sorry to see you go. We encourage our journalists to use social media as a good reporting tool and as a good way to promote their work and the work of their colleagues. And those are the two standards that we use for social media. We do a lot of training on what you should do and what you shouldn't do. You know, we have a pretty strong line about where your opinion belongs, and your opinion belongs in your head and not out through your fingertips. Not everybody is comfortable with doing it. We do a lot of training to help those who are not comfortable with doing it do it well. But we'd rather have somebody not participate in social media than bollocks it. And Kristin, you do some training on that. Would you add anything there?
Yeah, what I'd add is our goal, I mean, we'd love every reporter, photographer, AP news person to be tweeting, because we think it is a great forum. It's a great way to promote our content and have people understand our expertise. At the very least, we pretty much insist people use it for news gathering. It's just, you just can't. Sarah Palin announces everything through her Facebook page, and if you didn't want to look at her Facebook page, it's like a computer saying, well, I don't really want to use, a reporter saying, I don't really want to use email. You're choosing not to be competitive is the message we give if you are not using the social networks trolling for content.
What we don't do, though, is break news on Twitter. I mean, you all pay us a fair chunk of change to break news to you, and so we do. And then once it's broken to you, we promote it on the social networks with a link back to the actual story. And, you know, credible sources like AP and your news organizations are really where the traffic is going on places like Twitter. You know, there's a lot of stuff on Twitter, you know, people being killed off who aren't dead every day. And then there's what your organizations and ours are doing. And the traffic really goes to the credible organizations, and I think that's the value we continue to uphold together. Yeah, hey, Ray.
I can't help but ask another political question, and that is, you know, in this world when, you know, 24/7 journalism in terms of the campaign, everything is on websites and on cable TV all the time. But people are turning, in terms of the main news story of the day, people are turning to you all for the sort of straightforward sort of look at the news of the day. How do you approach the big political story of the day in a way that doesn't feel stale or old by the end of the cycle without sacrificing what people have traditionally gone to you for? And also, in that vein, are your main political stories would you say they're different than, say, 4 years ago in terms of the contents and the thrust of those stories?
I'll give you a short answer, and then I'm going to let Liz, who has to live this every day. I hope when you say straightforward in the tone that you use, you don't mean boring, right? Okay. Yeah. No, but the challenge absolutely is not just on political stories. That's the most fast-moving one. But for us is to be providing up-to-date, contextual, factual material throughout the course of a cycle of any story, any big story, whether those that are just a day or two old or those that extend over months and months. And then to come back around with something that you can put either in your print product or on your webpage, depending on what your own philosophy is, that kicks things forward. And Mike and Liz have been working a lot on that level of distinctiveness that is not opposite of the straightforward factual stuff, but does provide you something that is going to bring readers back to your papers, even if they've been on your website all day.
Rick, I actually think, and Liz will have much more to say on this, but she doesn't just live it every day. She lives it every 30 seconds. So.
Yeah. She's going through withdrawal because her BlackBerry's over here.
I actually think political campaigns have now become a great laboratory for a bigger challenge that journalism has, which is with all of this instant material surrounding us and some of our audience, but not everybody, the role of our larger journalism, whatever you want to call that, what used to be the day story, whatever you want to call that, that role has become, I think, answering the question, what just happened? What was that? What is this? And to get past, I think there's a much higher bar now to get past he said and she said and just stenographic reporting of the news, which, you know, frankly, Rick and you and I used to do brilliantly. but helping to explain what just happened has become a real premium in stories that move much sooner than would have been the case in the past. So, I mean, I often like to say that I think our biggest challenge right now is that the day 2 story and the day 3 story have to be done on day 1. And that's the pressure we're all under, and I don't think you see that anywhere more clearly than in the work that Liz is trying to do every day.
Yeah, I would say that it's become harder and harder. 4 years ago, I was the reporter leading the coverage and writing about the fast-moving campaign, and I'm amazed at how quickly things have changed in just 4 years. And we came into this cycle saying that we are going to take what I call all the tidbits that are out there, some of which may be true and some of which may be false, and we're going to adhere even more than we ever have to our standards. And we're going to get back to, you know, emphasizing that in our reporters, because there's so much crap out there, particularly in political journalism, that getting back to the basic facts and being rock solid on their accuracy is our first step. And then taking those facts and weaving them together in a way that connects the dots and doesn't just say this is what happened, but also says this is why it happened and this is why it matters to you, has been what has been our driving force for the last year. I think we're succeeding. Sometimes it means it may take a little bit longer for us to, get that complete picture to the wire, because we are being so diligent in trying to round out the coverage. If you look at the political coverage across the map, there aren't many news organizations, or frankly many reporters at those news organizations, who are trying to give people synthesize everything that's going on and saying this is what's happening. We're trying to do that every day. Some days we do it well, some days we don't do it so well, but I'm comfortable with where we're at and where we're headed because it's our goal.
I think we've got one last question. Take one last question.
I know you just said you don't break news on Twitter, but I'm wondering if you're potentially rethinking that for calling the various elections. Because I know as soon as you call it, within seconds, your call is going to be tweeted by millions.
Oh, yes.
So why not do it first?
because of our obligation to the people who fund us. Why should we be giving it to people for free? As soon as we call the race, we will be tweeting it ourselves, and it will be tweeted by others. But we really believe in that obligation we have to you. Just as one last note, we've all talked a lot about how important the relationship to APME and that to AP, the APME is. And I'd just like to underscore that with a plug for committee participation. You're going to hear from the leadership, and they're going to be asking you to volunteer for some of the committees that they've set up. And that's something that's a great way for you to have a very specific kind of role, both in APME and to work with AP on things. You know, Alan Miller, sitting down here in the front, has run the sounding board, which is an incredibly important tool for us. It's a great way for us to ask you questions and you give us feedback. And, you know, he's finally hanging up his hat from probably sheer exhaustion, because that's a big job. But I hope that when the call goes out for a committee that you will find one that appeals to you and engage in it, because it's something that's really helpful and important to us. We're glad to be here every year to talk with you. This is one of our most important dates. Thank you so much for spending time with us, and we look forward to seeing you at the rest of the convention. Thanks again.
Thank you, Kathleen, and thank you, members of the Associated Press, for this valuable briefing. We appreciate it. It's a big part of our conference.